Okay, 6:10, June 10th. Dis and data information. Welcome. TheAutonomousCollective.net. Well, we're going to show a couple of different things today. And since this came up fairly recently, a conversation with Yanis Varoufakis, and partially interesting because it's at Qatar. So without further ado,
about growth areas, about good investments, about risks and barriers. But this is going to be a conversation with someone who believes the following: that capitalism is now dead, in the sense that its dynamics no longer govern our economies, and that it has been replaced with techno-feudalism. So it is the thesis of economist and former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis. He has put it in this book, Techno-Feudalism, What Killed Capitalism, which is out now. And Yanis, you are very welcome to QEF, and I think you're going to challenge us a lot with what you're going to say. So before we get into the heart of the argument that you've put forward in the book and elsewhere, I want to take you back 10 years to the moment where you were in the global headlines. You were the Greek finance minister exactly at this point 10 years ago. A few weeks later, in early July 2015, you ended up resigning. It was an intense time because, as many of you will remember, it was the moment, well, the ongoing saga of the Greek financial crisis, and you were trying to have Greece's debts restructured. I wondered what the link is between what you lived through at that time and what you are so exercised by today.
Warning. Don't believe the AI trading hype until you watch this entire video. Hi, I'm Lane Mendelsohn. I'm the president of Vantage Point AI.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for asking all these questions. Thank you for the invitation to the Qatar Economic Forum. Look, let's go 10 years back. The only reason why I found myself in government was because the Greek state went bankrupt. It had gone bankrupt 10 years before. The people of Greece invited somebody like me to try their hand out. But let us not focus on Greece, because it wasn't a Greek financial crisis. It was a European banking crisis which begat the euro crisis.
It was the long tail, if you like, of 2008 and the financial crisis.
Exactly. It all starts in Wall Street, as it always does. Like 1929 began in Wall Street, 2008 was our generation's 1929. The banks of Germany and France discovered, to their great horror, these huge black holes after the subprime crisis. And then you will remember Dubai had a sovereign debt crisis, then it went to Greece, then it went to Ireland, then it went to Portugal. Okay, what was the real issue at the time? What was the real issue at the time was that after the collapse of Wall Street in 2008, in 2009 in London, in April, under the auspices of Gordon Brown, the UK Prime Minister then, the great and the good leaders, including prime ministers, presidents, and central bankers, got together and they decided to refloat finance. So we had a massive quantitative easing program, essentially printing money to refloat finance, while at the same time there was no coordination of fiscal policy. Indeed, whatever coordination there was, it was of an Austerian version, fiscal contraction. So when you contract aggregate demand and pump all these trillions into the Western economy, what you create is an incongruity, because there's a lot of money sloshing around in the financial sector, but industrialists, entrepreneurs, do not want to invest because they can see the low levels of demand. So what they do is they take the money and they plow it back into the financial sector, share buybacks and so on. The only entrepreneurs, capitalists, who invested a good chunk of the $35 trillion that was pumped through quantitative easing out between 2009 and 2022. The only entrepreneurs who seriously invested in new machinery, were the big tech, Silicon Valley tech leaders. And that gave rise, and this is the connection with what I'm saying in this book, to a remarkable transformation that humanity has never seen before. I truly mean that. I know that every generation wants to feel that we are on the cusp of a fantastic transformation. You know, we all have this delusion. But I believe that between 2010 and 2025, we had such a transformation. And allow me just to say what that transformation is. We have a new form of capital. Capital has always been, since time immemorial, since Paleolithic times, you know, when humans fashioned a hammer or a plow. What is a plow? It's something you create, you produce this machine to plow the land to produce something else, a produced means of production. That's what the steam engine was, which brought about the first industrial revolution. That's what electromagnetism, you know, generators and electricity grids and telephone grids were towards the end of the 19th century. That brought about the second industrial revolution. Between 2010 and 2025, we have a new form of capital. Because what lives in here, ladies and gentlemen, is a machine. It's not just what's in here, but all the networked machines that are connected to this. Satellites, the carbon fiber cables, the algorithms, the server farms, all that. I call this cloud capital because it lives supposedly on the cloud. It's not on the cloud, it's on Earth, and it's inside our oceans. What does this do? What does Amazon, or the Google, or the Meta algorithm do? It doesn't produce anything. What you buy on Amazon has been produced elsewhere. It hasn't been produced by Amazon. What it produces is a remarkable power to input and infuse desires and thoughts into your mind. So it's the first time we have machines that do that which once upon a time advertisers, human marketeers, orators, preachers, politicians, poets did, which is to change our mind, to modify our behavior. This is now automated. So anyone who owns concentrated quantities of cloud capital has an immense power. And just very, very briefly, in order to end this long-winded answer, think about Alexa. Alexa is this little contraption that Jeff Bezos sells you to connect to Amazon and to the internet. And you feel that it is your slave. You say, Alexa, order this book for me, or switch off the lights, or whatever, right? But essentially, it's an interface with this cloud capital belonging to Jeff Bezos, and you're training it to train you, to train it better, to know what you want, to give you good advice, to win over your trust. I don't know about you, but when Amazon recommends a book to me, I always want to read it, and I never regret it. Similarly with Spotify, when it recommends music to me, I actually like it, usually, and sometimes I love it.
Because it knows you very well.
I have trained it to train me to train it to know me.
Isn't that progress, Yanis? That is
of course it
the
is.
advance of technology.
But at the same time, it is a source of major crisis. Why? Because the moment it wins my trust, it can say to me, oh, buy this electric bicycle. And I say, okay, click, I buy it. And then this electric bicycle comes to me bypassing every market. Once upon a time, a brilliant advertiser could convince me that I need to eat a Big Mac, that I really shouldn't be eating. I didn't need it, I didn't want it. But it convinced me. But I had to go to McDonald's to get it. Now it comes directly to me, bypassing every market, and Amazon keeps up to 40% of the price. That's rent. And any economic system which is founded on rent, not profit, is a clear and present danger for the marketplace.
Okay, but people are making
because this money is coming out of the cyclical flow of income.
Okay, but so you're casting the tech giants essentially as not being producers and not adding value. Well, but they are enabling other businesses, aren't they? Someone has made that bicycle, someone has earned money from it being shipped to you. And if we look at another example, Google, their algorithms, okay, they change the whole time, and that is a terrible thing for businesses who one moment benefit and the other moment find themselves low on the search engines, but they also enable people to find things that are useful, whether they are products or services or merely information.
That's why we all use it. If you take away my phone from me, I'm dead.
So they are
There's
adding,
no doubt
but
about
that's what I mean, they are adding value.
No, they're not adding any value. They're extracting value. They're very clever at being useful to us.
Watch what eggs do to your brain. Take a look at these 2 brain scans. They both look young, strong, and healthy. But
making us feel be absolutely dependent on them, in order to extract, we both mentioned, Michelle, the electric bicycle. I love it when I press a button on the electric bicycle, one that I actually enjoy riding too, comes to my home. But think of the producer of this electric bicycle, and I don't mean just the worker that has worked on the assembly line, but I'm talking about the capitalist as well. He or she has to pay 40% to Amazon. This is the equivalent, that's the connection with feudalism. Under feudalism, what gave you power was property rights over the land. You owned the land and you could charge rent. And the great the great transformation of capitalism was that you moved away from wealth being concentrated in the hands of people who were lucky enough to inherit land, to entrepreneurs, to people who actually put everything together in the production process with old-fashioned capital as a produced means of production. But now, one of the reasons why our central bankers are having such a difficult time rebalancing our economies, we have inflationary pressures, and at the same time, if they don't keep adding to aggregate demand, there is a danger of falling into stagflation. One of the reasons is, when you've got about, this is my estimation, about 30% of GDP in advanced economies, and increasingly in developing economies, is siphoned off in terms of rent. Remember, David Ricardo, the great banker and economist and politician, at the turn of the 18th to the 19th century, wrote a whole book called The Principles of Economics, of Political Economy, in which he lambasted the landlords because their rent was impeding the development of markets and entrepreneurship. And he was asking that, he was simply worried, and I think he was correct, that when a large chunk of GDP goes into rent, then the marketplace and our capacity to accumulate productive capital shrinks. This is David Ricardo, 1800s, early 1800s. I think that he today would be absolutely appalled by the manner in which this amount of wealth, think about, Meta, Zuckerberg's Facebook and so on. Do you know that only about 1 to 2% of their revenues goes to salaries? Because all of us, every time you post something on Instagram or Facebook, every time you post something, you're adding to the cloud capital of Zuckerberg. And this is free labor. Now, you may enjoy it. Of course you enjoy it. That's why you're doing it.
Well, you don't think about it most of the time.
But you are contributing free labor, which does not come back to the circular flow of income.
But Yanis, most of us have agreed to that contract, and we've ticked the terms and conditions often with it because we want the service for free.
Indeed. But if you go back to the feudal era, the vast majority of the peasants believed that it was a good and fair system. They even enjoyed life. We have a very negative view of feudalism. If you go back to the actual literature of the 16th century, 17th century, people they didn't work very long hours. They had their rituals. They had they had lots of holidays. It's not clear. I mean, sometimes when the landlord overdid it in the rent extraction game, they rebelled and chopped off their heads. But, the fact that we consent to something does not take away from the economics of it and from the reality that we are essentially undermining the capacity of our macroeconomies to reproduce themselves in a manner which is not degenerative.
Okay, so the rent idea is if going back to your Amazon example, if the rent is 10% rather than 40%, does that fundamentally change your objection? I.e., do you object, could you accept Amazon getting something like that for the service it is providing, for what it is enabling? Is it the amount that bothers you?
It's not just the amount, because you see, once you have control of this cloud capital, whether you are a nice person or not a nice person, whether you're Jeff Bezos or, some saint, the incentives are ever so powerful to extract more and more. Because, as we know, from politics, from society, from families, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? This is a remarkable power that you have if you own that machine. And so let me give you an example of the things that happen. So Amazon, or Google for that matter, or Uber, they entice you to get in as a seller, as a producer. If you are a driver of a car, they entice you. Uber gives you good rates to drive. Amazon invites producers to sell through Amazon, giving them, extracting a very low percentage for them. But once you're doing really well by selling your services or your products through Amazon, through Uber, through Airbnb, and so on, the incentive is there for them to downgrade you. So you know what Google does with publishers. Initially, they're very high up on the search list, then they are pushed down, and then they're asked to pay more money, and there's a process that a friend of mine and a very astute observer of what I call techno-feudalism, Cory Doctorow, has referred to as enshittification. This is the natural incentives within these big tech companies. Once they lure you in there, both as a consumer, a user, and as a producer, to extract more and more from you. And therefore, you have a systemic process of extraction, which is macroeconomically highly dangerous. And this is not just for the United States and for Europe. Did you know that in countries like Indonesia, for instance, millions of small-scale kiosks and retailers have been taken over by the Amazon conglomerates and the various other cloud capitalists of that region. So you see this extraction process depleting the resources of actual producers globally. So my job is to alert people to this.
Okay. Do you use these services?
All the time. All the time. But you see,
What, with gritted teeth, or what is...
No, I don't believe in individualistic acts of, vanity, rebellion. That is, what is going to change if I stop using my phone?
How to kill all mosquitoes in the area in just minutes. This simple but brilliant trick you can do tonight to eliminate all mosquitoes around you is taking the US by storm. A genius.
The world is not going to become a better place. I think that these machines are a great tribute to the human spirit. So take AI. You have AI programs, as we speak, that design antibiotics which can kill bacteria that kill people. Now that needs to be celebrated. So I don't have a problem with the machinery. I don't have a problem with the code. I have a problem with who owns these.
Okay, but maybe that was made possible by the 40% what you would call rent.
It has been made possible, but at the same time, a lot of other activities have been made possible. For instance, Amazon in the United States uses exactly the same algorithms that design successful antibiotics in order to surveil workers in the Amazon warehouses and use a mathematical statistical program for predicting the probability that Joe or Kathy is going to talk to somebody and that this discussion may lead to unionization in the particular warehouse, and if the probability exceeds a certain threshold, either they're fired or they shut down, they mothball that particular warehouse in order to prevent unionization. So there are many different uses. So for me, it's not what these machines do, that I have no problem with. My problem is who owns them. And there is exorbitant power in owning Twitter, for instance, or owning Instagram, or owning TikTok. It is utterly inconsistent with any concept of liberal democracy.
And you know that Elon Musk joined us here at the forum 2 days ago, and one of the things he would like to do is to have a payment system within X to give it another dimension. And I'm interested in what you think of that, because I know that you look to China and you see positives in the WeChat app, for example, which is a very all-consuming app. But isn't that another example of a tremendous monopoly power? So if that is the answer, then why would a payment system within X and extra dimensions to services like that not be welcome as well?
Well, interestingly, when Elon Musk purchased Twitter, remember, something like 44 billion, the whole of the press was dumping on him. What a stupid, purchase that was. I thought it was a brilliant purchase. Because exactly, and back then, and it's actually in the book, I explained why he bought Twitter. He wanted an everything app. He wanted to create his own WeChat. And for those of you who don't know, WeChat is a Chinese application that does everything that our Western applications do, from Netflix to Twitter to this, but also it offers you an opportunity to make free payments independently of where you have your bank account, as long as it is in one. And Elon Musk was trying, or is trying to do with X, that which Zuckerberg failed to do with Facebook. Remember, he was going to introduce his own currency, the Libra, or the Libra. And Wall Street killed that. Wall Street is trying, as we speak, to kill Elon Musk's version of WeChat. Now, I think that there are two important points to make about this aspiration of Elon Musk. The first one is that the public out there really want it. Because who wants to pay commission to their, the Bank of America, to JP Morgan, to Barclays Bank, and so on? And why should these banks, when they have a zero marginal cost for our transactions, charge us for it? And they charge us for essentially allowing us to use our own money. And this is preposterous. So this is a rent that has to go. And Elon Musk could be sitting here saying, yeah, you see, I'm against rent. I want to create a free payment system through X. Yeah, but he wants to control it himself. And we know this, that any private system of monetary transactions is the first step towards a major crash, a major crisis. Because we can never trust a privateer with our money.
In that, are you on the side of Wall Street rather than Musk?
No, what I'm saying is I believe in a third way. I, for instance, would very much welcome the Fed issuing its own digital wallet. Imagine if you could download, if you were in the United States, your Fed app, or in the European Union, your ECB app. And you could, put your money in there, ask your employer to pay your salary there, if you want to, totally voluntarily. And imagine if you were to collect the overnight interest rate of the central bank, which is always much higher than what commercial banks. This would be a tremendous step in the direction of cultivating more competition in the financial sector.
It would be like your PayPal or equivalent as well, or your Apple Wallet, that it would be where you
wouldn't need the Apple Wallet anymore, because you would have free payments anywhere in the world using your central bank app. By the way, the bankers already have that, because private banks, commercial banks, have accounts with the Fed. Now, the Chinese are doing that. The only reason why the United States cannot do this is because Wall Street is going to kick and scream. I know that Christine Lagarde and the ECB wants to do this for the euro, and it would be a great financial innovation, but the banks in Frankfurt and Paris are going to be all over her if she dares do this, so they are trying to contain it so that you can't have more than 1,000 or 2,000 euros in it. Essentially, the bankers want their monopoly. They shouldn't have it. They should not be allowed to have it. So I'm against an Elon Musk-owned cryptocurrency or payment system. I'm against WeChat, because I don't believe that we have the right to create yet more exorbitant power in the hands of an individual. But at the same time, I do believe that we should democratize and socialize these digital payment systems. I don't believe in going back to cash. I believe in digital payments. We should own them collectively. Because, Michelle, we create money collectively. It's a mistake to think that the central bank creates the money. In every advanced economy, only about 3 to 4% of money has been created by the central bank. The rest is created privately. Every time a bank extends a loan or an overdraft facility, it creates money. This is immense power. And I do believe that in democracies, this power should be democratized. Okay. And the technology gives us an opportunity to do that. So Elon Musk opens a way for us to do that which he doesn't want us to do.
Okay. It's very useful to have got both your diagnosis of the problem and at least one or some of your solutions for the future. We only have a minute left, so leave the audience here with one action point. You're still going to use these apps, we're all still going to use these services, but what would you like people here to take action on?
Well, if you are the mayor of a city, or if you play an active role as an active citizen in your municipality, in your region, what about suggesting that you create a socially owned competitor to Uber, Airbnb, to Google, and to Amazon? Why should these rents end up at the Cayman Islands, through Ireland usually, being owned by big tech, the big tech oligarchy, who, on the one hand, they're very small people, and they deserve to be rich, but they don't deserve to collect 30% of global GDP simply because they have monopoly over us. We can differ politically between rightists, leftists, centrists, and so on and so forth. But I don't think we can disagree that having a monopoly over the most powerful form of capital, which is so concentrated in two loci, in Silicon Valley and around Shenzhen, that does not make for a stable world, that poisons our democracies, and it even intensifies the clash between the United States and China, making this world a much more existentially challenged place.
Okay, let me jump to the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about or to present on, and that is something a little closer ideologically, but an issue nonetheless, because is not fascism a monopoly, a political monopoly of one kind or another? The political monopoly on power, as we've seen with the attempt to subvert in America the Posse Comitatus Act.
Hello and welcome. Hi. Got a couple people walking in here. Hi, welcome to the YDSA, the Young Democratic Socialists of America, and our first ever speaker presentation here at Kansas State University. My name is Daniel, and I am one of the co-chairs here at the YDSA. I've been working as hard as I can, along with the many of our team members, to make sure that this event is possible and that we could get Dr. Rockhill here to this campus. So I just first wanted to give a great thanks to all of the folks who have volunteered for this event, who have worked on our team and worked hard to make sure that every step of this process is as clean and as finished as possible. So thank you to all of them. Next, I want to thank the Student Governing Association for providing the funds for this event. They were the ones that made it possible for us to be able to invite the speaker here, as well as be able to put on this event so that it can be free for all of you to attend. So thank you again for that. With that, we will have Nick, our other co-chair at the YDSA, introduce our speaker.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Nick McKee-Rice. I'm the other co-chair with the YDSA. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I also want to thank Dr. Rockhill for joining us today to share his insights on the rise of fascism and the failures of liberalism. This is a crucial conversation to have right now, just not in theory, but also in practice, as this moment demands clarity above all else, as well as action. Many of you have probably already seen some initiatives that the YDSA has been doing, like our Plan B, Free Plan B and Free Narcan actions, our advocacy for Palestinian liberation and trying to keep ICE off campus. We've been organizing for justice in all forms. Maybe you've passed along our tables that happen in the union every week for the countless hours that our members do, almost spending too much time and not focusing on their homework. But none of this happens without the support from our community. Every campaign, every action, every flyer, every infographic is possible only because of the broader K-State community. By showing up today, signing our petitions and reposting our infographics, even the kind of janky ones, you've already taken a huge step. But now I'm asking for you guys to do one step further. Follow us on Instagram, fill out our interest form, join our meetings. It is a big step right now, I know. But we are not that scary. I know our politics, socialism is a big word for a lot of folks, but we have a friendly faces here, right? We have food at our events, stuff like that. I am asking you guys to join us. I will be honest, we are organizing at a time when the threat of fascism is escalating, not as some fringe movement, but as a reaction to the deep crisis within our political and economic systems. When people lose faith in the systems that only serve the rich, it fosters a groundwork for fascism to breed. That's what makes this moment so urgent. If you don't understand fascism as a product of capitalism in decay, if we treat it as some random glitch that rather than a feature of the failing system, we risk repeating history. That's why I am so grateful to have Dr. Rockhill join us today. As a philosopher, writer, founder of the Critical Theory Workshop, he has helped expose the deep ties between liberalism and fascism, and challenges us to think what liberation truly looks like. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Rockhill.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. It's a real honor for me to be invited to Kansas State University. I've been invited around the world to many prestigious places. I've been in Barcelona, I've been in Buenos Aires, I've been in China, but this is for me the greatest possible honor because I grew up in Kansas on a farm not far from here. And one of my sweetest memories of my life, I'm starting out light because it's going to get dark after this for the discussion. So one of my best memories is I moved to Paris, must have been 25 years ago. I was able to get a scholarship after my undergraduate studies, and I didn't know anyone there. I barely knew the language, but I knew one person who was a friend of a friend with whom I'd worked construction for about 6 years in rural Kansas, including at the Pony Express station in West Kansas, and a number of other kind of historical sites. And he said, you know, I went to K-State with my good friend, Eric. He lives in Paris, go and meet him. And so I wrote to Eric. Eric said, yeah, just go to this cafe, wear an orange shirt. And I was a bit of a hayseed, but I did have an orange shirt, and I went and I met him, and he picked up this little hayseed from Kansas and got me an apartment, introduced me to wonderful people, set me up, taught me the ropes, taught me how to buy a suit, how to wear a suit. I got cleaned up, got educated. And so I have an eternal debt to Eric, and via Eric, Kansas State University. It's a real honor to be here. And the topic for today is something that I've been working on for quite some time because I think it's integral for all of them, is where it comes from, and most importantly, how to fight it, and what the fight looks like when you don't just win it in the short term, but when you win it in the long term. And part of what I'm going to present is the opening section to a book that I've been working on called, and don't be scared of the title, Fascism and the Socialist Solution. The opening comments are going to be somewhat of a conceptual nature. There was some here earlier who was joking about me citing Hegel or maybe getting all philosophical. There is a philosophic component, but the reason I want to start with this is because of how strange the concept of fascism is and how it tends to operate to obfuscate the actual material reality of fascism. So the concept of fascism, as it is commonly used within mainstream discourse, functions in the most singular fashion. When the question is raised if such or such phenomenon is fascist, it is considered perfectly natural to compare it to the supposed touchstone of fascism, which is taken to be the form that it took in Italy and especially Germany. Paul Sweezy described the situation as follows, quote, "For a political system to qualify as fascist, it has to display the German or Italian characteristics of fascism. It must be based on a fascist mass movement anchored primarily in paramilitary formations of brown shirts or black shirts. It must be a one-party regime with a party headed by a Führer or some other figure symbolizing the principle of authoritarian leadership. It must be violently nationalist, racist, anti-Semitic. It must be frankly illiberal, intolerant of opposition, hostile to civil liberties and human rights." This is quite obviously the standard yardstick. So we ask questions like, well, are there swastikas, goose steps, and Nazi salutes? There are Nazi salutes, by the way, but this ends up being the qualifying attribute of whether or not something counts as fascism. There are more or less extreme versions of this approach. Some of them focus specifically on Nazism as the ideal type of fascism, whereas others concentrate slightly more on fascism that is supposed to define the general and not the other way around. A specific manifestation of fascism is assumed to serve as the touchstone for judging whether or not fascism exists in a particular instance. Now, we should take a moment to register how strange this is, because other political concepts don't function in this manner. It becomes readily apparent if one thinks, for instance, of a category like revolution. Would it be appropriate to draw the conclusion that an uprising is a revolution if and only if the same fundamental pattern it follows is that of the French Revolution, for instance? Should one specific revolution serve as the touchstone for all revolutions? The absurdity of such a proposition becomes obvious if you consider a widely used political concept like that of a state. Should we restrict our use of the term only to those situations that resemble a particular state, such as the United States? What about the category of dictatorship? Can the concept of colonialism refer only to the model of French colonialism in Africa? Right? Now, a likely criticism of this line of argumentation, or what's implicit in what I just said, is that the concept of fascism emerged in Italy to describe a novel form of politics, and it therefore makes sense to consider it as the prototypical exemplar of fascism. It is certainly true that this is where the concept emerged, but is highly significant, as Benito Mussolini himself regularly insisted, that it first appeared as an inchoate, disorganized movement that was only later and awkwardly conceptualized. Fascism in Italy was an evolving project that changed very significantly over time. The practice was primary, and its conceptualization followed in turn, meaning that there was not a predefined idea of fascism that determined the practice, but rather a shifting series of activities that were later conceptualized as fascism. When the term emerged, it was strongly affiliated with Italy, to such an extent, in fact, that the Nazis themselves often referred to the fascists as people distinct from themselves, meaning the people in Italy. By contrast, the Nazis called themselves National Socialists, abusing the term socialist, by the way, which we could come back to in the Q&A. In 1934, Joseph Goebbels wrote in Fascism and Its Practical Results, quote, "Mussolini stands at the beginning and at the end of the political development that we call fascism. Fascism is a phenomenon that entered the world of phenomena for the first time with Mussolini, Fascism received from Mussolini not only the idea, but also the shape and organization. Fascism in this sense, let's end quote, fascism in this sense was understood as a proper name. It stood for the unique form of politics implemented in Italy under Mussolini. In Mein Kampf, Hitler also used the term fascism in this manner to refer to political developments in Italy. But at the same time, Italian fascism clearly exercised an important influence over German National Socialism. And Goebbels recognized this. He described this in terms of a confluence between them insofar as they're both driving in the same direction. Quote, I'm firmly convinced that the political direction that we today call fascism in Italy, and which we call in Germany National Socialism, will gradually penetrate the whole of Europe. That there can no longer be any inhibition or obstacle to it, and that the future of our continent depends on the breakthrough of this political phenomenon, end quote. He is here identifying a common practice behind two different national movements affiliated with the concepts of Nazism and fascism at the time. It is this common practice that would be conceptually identified with the term fascism. Rather than simply functioning as a proper name, tethered to the specific type of rule in Italy under Mussolini, the term was given its conceptual birthright by being elevated to the status of a genus with multiple species, right? National Socialism and Italian fascism being species of the genus fascism. In this regard, it is important to note that at the same time, there was a clear identification of movements around, or I should say across the capitalist world, that were recognized as fascist in this sense, including, very importantly, if you look at the mainstream press in the United States in the 1930s, the Ku Klux Klan, which was identified as being an American version of fascism. So even though the term fascism was minted in Italy and it originally functioned as a proper name to refer to this unique phenomenon, it became a concept by being recognized as a more general category that could be applied to other instances. In the 1930s, the communist movement widely used the concept of fascism to refer not only to Italy and Germany, but also to similar reactionary political movements across the entire capitalist world. There were fascist movements in every capitalist country in the wake of the Great Depression. Figures like Antonio Gramsci, Togliatti, Dutt, and many others used the concept in this sense. Nazism, by contrast, largely remained a proper name, used to index the specific form of fascism in Germany and those who identified directly with it, including, of course, after the war. In other words, fascism was broadly recognized as the genus of which Nazism and Italian fascism were but species. With all of this in mind, we can now return to the common sense understanding of fascism in the contemporary world. What is remarkable is that at least when the term is invoked to discuss developments in the capitalist world, the category of fascism is often deprived of its conceptual power of generalization because it is collapsed into a particular instantiation thereof. Such particularization renders the concept ineffective, since, at least in extreme cases, it simply becomes a matter of studying how a specific phenomenon measures up to a particular ideal type of fascism. Rather than Nazism and Italian fascism being recognized as specific manifestations of a more general fascism, they become the universal form by which all potential forms of fascism are judged. The relationship between the particular and the universal is thereby inverted. Rather than the particular being subsumed under the universal, it is the general that is subservient to the specific. So the very idea of fascism is thereby deprived of one of the major features of concepts in general, their ability to concretely abstract from empirical particulars to identify patterns at a higher level of generality. Without this power of concrete abstraction, a concept is reduced to little more than an empirical description of one particular phenomenon. It's quite literally deconceptualized. It has no power as a concept. It instead comes to function more like a proper name that indexes a singular reality. Instead of fascism functioning like other political concepts, by identifying general patterns, it comes to function more like a proper name organically linked to one particular social phenomenon. right? To simplify this, it would be, well, somebody's a Nazi because they give a Nazi salute, or somebody's a fascist because they have a swastika tattooed on them, but you couldn't recognize someone as a fascist if they do not have those particular attributes. The conceptual reduction of fascism to the proper name of a particular is also visible in one of the other tendencies within the mainstream conceptualization of fascism. If it is invoked to refer to developments in the capitalist world above and beyond the Nazi fascist exemplar, it is most often used as a form of moral or political condemnation of an individual, such as Trump, Orban, Musk, Bolsonaro, rather than as a critique of the system that produces such individuals. A single person is thereby judged to be fascist, usually based on the Hitler-Mussolini model, but this again singularizes the concept of fascism, depriving it of its power of generalization and its ability to describe a system of governance within which individuals operate. The overall ideological effect of the particularization of the concept of fascism, unique phenomenon reappears. It primarily rears its evil head in individuals, not the system that produced them, once again promoting the assumption that fascism is an exceptional development. The next section of my talk is totalitarianism, or the ubiquitous affiliation between fascism and communism. I didn't realize that the color was appropriate, so, but I'm glad I brought that water bottle. So the ideology of fascist exceptionalism, that's what I've been describing. The ideology of fascist exceptionalism primarily applies to the capitalist world, and more specifically to the imperialist countries and their allies, the leading capitalist powers, Western Europe and the United States. It implicitly suggests that the abhorrent violence of fascism only manifests itself in the imperialist world order in the rarest of instances, and perhaps only once in history, or only through the nefarious effects of diabolical individuals. Capitalist societies involved in imperialism are thereby depicted as structurally devoid of fascism, at least for the most part, and the latter is presented as a rare disease that has only infected a few aberrant societies or individuals. The ideology of fascist exceptionalism thereby goes hand in hand with the assumption that fascism is an irregularity within the capitalist world and a radical departure from its normal functioning. By contrast, there has been a powerful ideological effort to use the concept of fascism in the opposite sense when it comes to socialist countries, generalizing it to the utmost as a characteristic of most, if not all, societies that have sought to liberate themselves from capitalism. The master concept that has played a major role in these ideological endeavors is that of totalitarianism. This concept was originally used by communists to describe the totalitarian control of workers' lives under capitalism. However, in the post-war era, figures like Zbigniew Brzezinski and Hannah Arendt attempted to redefine totalitarianism as a general conceptual category that applied equally to fascism and communism. This was part of a larger psychological warfare campaign on the part of imperialist states to redefine fascism in such a way that it was seen to be a feature of communist societies. Brzezinski and Arendt had ties to the US national security state and the national security state of the United Kingdom, and they were involved to some degree in academically laundering state-driven propaganda. Here we arrive then at the central paradox of the common sense use of the concept of fascism. Whereas it is treated as a singular aberration within the capitalist world, it is judged to be ubiquitous in, or even a constitutive feature of, the communist or socialist world. It is singularized to such an extent that it all but disappears under capitalism, whereas it is generalized to such an extent under communism that some major Western analysts, like Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer of the Frankfurt School, have claimed that fascism and communism are simply the same thing. Slavoj Žižek has recently continued this trend by drawing on the dubious scholarship of the eugenicist A. James Gregor to assert that post-Deng China is a variant of contemporary fascism. This process of conceptual overgeneralization not only applies to communist countries, but it also includes nearly any strong state that resists imperialism. To take but a few examples, political figures like Saddam Hussein, Omar Gaddafi, and Bashar al-Assad have regularly been compared to Hitler, thereby suggesting that they were the leaders of modern-day Nazi states. I've never encountered a mainstream discourse that applies the ideology of fascist exceptionalism to countries like Iraq, Libya, and Syria, meaning a discourse that cried foul and claimed that the comparison is absolutely illegitimate because the fundamental features of the Third Reich were not present. There weren't swastikas, Nazi salutes, etc. The same is very much true of the condemnation of communism as fascism. Have the ideologues of empire ever held their analysis of communist countries up to the same standard as capitalist countries, when it's a matter of comparing them to the touchstone of Nazism and fascism? And have any of them claimed, for instance, that Poland and Czechoslovakia did not share essential characteristics, or that more generally, their anti-colonial, anti-capitalist internationalism inexorably separated them from the colonial, capitalist ultranationalism of fascism? We see here, and this is my basic point if I lost you at any point in what I just outlined, that the mainstream dominant concept of fascism is radically lacking in analytic rigor and in the power of conceptual generalization. The next section, which is very short, is fascism and imperialism. Here we arrive then at the heart of matters. The ideology of fascist exceptionalism seeks to render fascism a complete anomaly in the imperialist world order, thereby conceptually severing fascism from imperialism. The ideology of fascist overgeneralization aims at making fascism ubiquitous in the regions of the world that resist imperialism, the most significant of which are the countries that are building an anti-imperialist socialist world order. The bourgeois ideology of fascism thereby turns the world completely upside down, making fascism into a characteristic of anti-imperialist resistance rather than a fundamental feature of imperialism. This ideological inversion goes a long way to explaining how the dominant concept of fascism functions as a term of condemnation. The fascists are those to be morally condemned for resisting the global order of the so-called free world, meaning imperialism. They are, in short, our enemies. This bourgeois ideology of fascism was cemented into the bedrock of US-American ideology through the myth of the Good War. It is to this foundational ideological historical narrative that I'd now like to turn. So this is the title of the next section. So the United States emerged from the Second World War as the undisputed leader of the capitalist and imperialist camp. The former imperialist powers of Western Europe had been destroyed by the war. Its founding legend has been insightfully diagnosed by historian Jacques Pauwels in a book entitled The Myth of the Good War. There are a number of facets to this mythology, but the core belief is that the United States is an anti-fascist defender of democracy and freedom, whose mission is to support the so-called free world. It thereby arrived as a leader on the world stage under the banner of the defeat of fascism. Its culture industries, which are the most powerful in the world, have put all of their ample resources into spreading this message far and wide in an attempt to guarantee that the United States took the helm of global imperialism under the guise of being the greatest defender of democracy that the world has ever seen. The ideology of fascist exceptionalism within the imperialist world order was integral to the myth of the Good War. By cementing the idea that fascism is an anomaly within the imperialist world and that it was defeated by the fearless guardian of democracy, it established a bedrock narrative, according to which the world order overseen by the United States was founded on the defeat of fascism and the victory of democracy. This is one of the reasons why there has been a very strong tendency within mainstream discourse to resist the use of the category of fascism when analyzing the imperialist order governed by the United States. It couldn't possibly be fascist because the United States became the leading world power through its world historical defeat of fascism. The ideology of fascist overgeneralization, which applies the category indiscriminately to communist countries as well as other nations that resist imperialism, has allowed the United States to further develop its founding narrative in terms of an ongoing fight against fascism. The Nazi designs of an evil empire were quickly followed by the Soviets and now the Chinese, according to the dominant narrative. The message is clear. If fascism exists in the world, it is to be located in the anti-imperialist movements, particularly those that pose the greatest threat because they have a universal and international project of anti-imperialist liberation. In this sense, the myth of the Good War is the founding legend that consolidated both the ideology of fascist exceptionalism within the imperialist world and the ideology of its ubiquitous presence in the anti-imperialist world. Now, to be sure, the United States entered the war, World War II, on the side of the Soviets and contributed to the defeat of the Nazis. Some 400,000 US soldiers gave their lives fighting Nazism and fascism, making decisive contributions in Western Europe and Japan. If we were to use the vocabulary of Antonio Gramsci, we might say that there is a kernel of good sense, meaning a grain of truth, within the common sense narrative regarding the United States anti-fascist orientation. However, this needs to be very seriously contextualized. The overwhelming majority of the Second World War was fought in the East, with some 27 million Soviets and 20 million Chinese giving their lives in the fight against fascism. They were the ones who deserve the greatest credit for defeating it, and many of them were self-declared communists. The United States entered the war very late and in an opportunist manner, with an eye to the spoils of war after it was clear that the Soviets were routing the Nazis. Moreover, it had not at all resisted the rise of fascism in spite of innumerable opportunities, such as during the Spanish Civil War, or when Stalin beseeched US American leaders on numerous occasions to enter into an anti-fascist alliance. The US national security state also began cozying up to Nazi and fascist elements before the official end of hostilities. This is very well documented through internal documents that are available through Freedom of Information Act requests and in various archives that I've consulted. After the war, the United States established a veritable fascist international, integrating, and I know this might sound surprising to some of you, but it's extremely well documented. I have a number of articles on it with myriad references, many of them archival, but there's also a lot of great historical scholarship. The United States integrated tens of thousands of fascists, these are from Italy and from Germany, into its ranks, and many thousands more in a global empire. In doing so, the United States did not publicly declare itself to be the Fourth Reich. On the contrary, it has done everything in its power to maintain the narrative according to which it is the greatest defender of freedom and democracy. Its mobilization of fascist forces around the world has therefore been done under the cover of liberalism, as if it were spreading freedom and democracy. In order to break, then, with this dominant ideological concept of fascism and restore its theoretical use value, it is helpful to distinguish between, it's helpful to clarify the precise historical relationship between fascism and liberalism. The next section is entitled Liberalism and Fascism, Partners in Capitalist Crime. The dominant bourgeois concept of fascism presents it as the opposite of liberalism. And it also defines the very essence of the fight against fascism as the struggle for liberalism. Now, some of this makes sense insofar as liberal modes of governance tend to protect democratic rights for at least certain segments of the population. And I think particularly in a moment like the moment that we're in, the defense of liberal democratic rights is absolutely 100% necessary. That said, the idea that liberalism and fascism would be in fundamental opposition to one another misses something absolutely essential. And that is that fascism and liberalism are both forms of political management of capitalism. The oft-cited exemplary cases of Italy and Germany that I was talking about a moment ago are highly revealing in this regard. In Italy, in October of 1922, magnates in the Confederation of Industry, so some of the richest capitalists in Italy, provided Mussolini with millions in order to organize his march on Rome as a spectacular show of force. Fascism rises through the support of the capitalist ruling class. It is what you would call astroturf, right? Grassroots movements come organically from below. Astroturfing is a term for when you create the illusion that things come from below by parachuting finances from above. Fascism, as far as I know, at least all of the movements that I've studied, are astroturfed movements. Italy is a great example of it. But what's interesting is Mussolini did not seize power. He had the capitalist class behind him. He'd done the March on Rome. He could have immediately declared a dictatorship. He didn't do that. Instead, he insisted on having elections and running a common slate in the elections with the liberals. The fascists had only 35 seats in parliament, but thanks to the common slate with the liberals, they gained 280 seats, 286 seats in the parliament. This same basic pattern of ruling class financial backing and liberal complicity, right? We have to keep both of those things in mind. Ruling class backing and liberal complicity. This same pattern was visible in Germany. In a speech on October 19, 1935, Hitler reminisced on what it meant to have the material resources necessary to support 1,000 Nazi orators with their own cars who could hold some 100,000 public meetings in the course of a year. Prior, and this money was the industrialists in Germany, as well as actually US foreign direct investment under the Nazis rose extensively. And many US capitalists invested very directly in Hitler. Ford is the most famous, but there are many, many others. Prior to the election, the Communist Party candidate Ernst Thälmann had argued that a vote for the conservative Field Marshal von Hindenburg amounted to a vote for Hitler and for war. Only weeks after Hindenburg's election, he invited Hitler to become chancellor. So Hitler became chancellor via an election and then an appointment. Fascism in both cases came to power through bourgeois parliamentary democracy, in which big capital bankrolled the candidates who would do its bidding while also creating a populist spectacle, false revolution, that marshaled or suggested mass appeal. Once its power was consolidated, it unflinchingly set about, and the rhythm was different, right? In Italy, it was very slow, the change. In Germany, they hit the gas pedal very quickly. But in both cases, they crushed organized labor, eradicated opposition parties, destroyed independent publications, put a halt to elections, scapegoated and eliminated racialized underclasses, privatized public assets, launched projects of colonial expansion, and invested heavily in a war economy beneficial to its industrial supporters. So capitalist states with bourgeois democracies at the time refused to form an anti-fascist coalition with the Soviet Union, a country that 14 of them had invaded and occupied from 1918 to 1920 in a failed attempt to destroy the world's first workers' republic. During the Spanish Civil War, Western liberal democracies did not officially support the left-leaning government that had been elected. Franco, of course, who was the fascist who was opposed to the left-wing government that had come to power through elections, is, according to his own words, a fascist. He has a number of articles where he explains that he is himself a fascist. In 1934, the United Kingdom, France, and Italy signed the Munich Agreement, in which they agreed to allow Hitler to invade and colonize the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. Indeed, it was the fear of being left to confront Hitler alone that eventually drove Stalin, since 1934, the unswerving champion of an alliance with the West against Hitler, into the Stalin-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939, by which he hoped to keep the USSR out of the war. This non-aggression pact was then disingenuously presented in the Western media as an undeniable indication that the Nazis and communists were somehow allies. There's been a study that was done that's quite interesting that showed that if that pact hadn't been signed, the non-aggression pact, it bought time for the Soviet Union to build up its productive forces and its war capacity. And if they hadn't done that, then there's a much stronger possibility that the Soviets would have lost the war against the Nazis. And if the Nazis had won against the Soviet Union, then we'd be, speaking German in France now. I mean, it'd be a very, very different world. And that's the tip of the iceberg. There'd be a lot more. The German Nazis killed, according to some statistics, 6 million people in gas chambers. They had plans to kill 60 million in the East. They were going to genocidally eliminate the socialist alternative of the Soviet Union. That was the plan. Hitler spelled it out, and Stalin knew it was coming, and he had to buy time in order to defend the people against fascist onslaught. So liberalism and fascism are best understood as capitalist modes of political management. The former rules primarily by consent, and the latter principally by repression. But they often work in tandem with one another. Liberalism, we might say, is the good cop of capitalism, and fascism is the bad cop. They both work together to ensure capitalist dominion. And this metaphor is important because, of course, if you have a choice between a good cop and a bad cop, it's much better to be working with somebody who's going to bring you coffee, let you make a phone call, try to cozy up to you, than somebody who's going to be, getting a sledgehammer out and torturing you. So there should be no kind of ultra-leftist perversion of the argument that I'm making. They work in tandem with one another to manage a capitalist society. But if we have to choose between the two, we have a much better chance working with the liberal good cop than the fascist bad cop. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to jump over a few things that I'd be happy to discuss in the Q&A if I'm okay on time, and change gears a little bit, because what I'm interested in sharing with you, and this is all ongoing research, is how then to draw on this kind of conceptual mapping of fascism to understand the current moment, and more specifically, the incoming Trump administration.
Okay, I'll leave the remaining for you to look up yourselves. This is the link in the chat. You can speed ahead and change the speed, et cetera, et cetera. Rockhill is one of those interesting guys, an American who, is actually quite adept in various French theories. So needless to say, it's what he's in support of is a kind of critical theory that allows us to combine a certain kind of refined approach to Western Marxism, among other things. And so I think he's one of those really good kind of scholars too, because he has feet in a variety of areas. And anyway, so much for that. Let me stop share and stop live stream, and we can return to our regularly scheduled program. The front end, for those who arrived late, was a talk from a couple of days ago in Qatar, also weird in its own context. Yanis Varoufakis talking at a Bloomberg symposium on techno-feudalism. Needless to say, a book tour sort of thing, but also I think, it's I think important to get our facts straight, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I will thank you for your attention. Note at later tonight at 6:30 Eastern Time is the People's Forum. The red hour is going to be, I think, prior to that. So hang in there, folks.
Yes, we'll start the red